Hey, it's Kathy with Rocky Retirement. And as promised, today's Friday, and so you'll be getting to listen to Henry Shapiro's Retired Excited. I know you're just going to love this as much as I do. And don't forget, you can still listen to Rock Your Retirement, where I'm the host, and those shows are released on Mondays.
Welcome to the Retired Excited podcast. Retired Excited, the show where we give retired and want to be retired folk a look at how great retired life can be. Here we talk to men and women who are happily retired and loving their life. Together, we will delve into what retired happiness really looks like and how anyone can achieve it.
Here is your host, Henry Shapiro.
Hey folks, Henry here at Retired Excited, the show providing inspiration for people who are nearly retired, newly retired, or say they're never going to retire. Here we talk to retired people doing things that make them happy. Things from stamp collecting to cruising, from dancing to touring the world on a motorbike. We talk to everyday retired people who are living the life they want, and we talk to a few professionals to get expert advice. And I chip in with some of my own experiences. Well, hi there everybody, it's Henry with Retired Excited. Today we're going to be talking to a couple who I think are exceptional people. Their names are Jenny and Stan Brown. Now Stan, for most of his professional life, has been a self-employed electrical contractor, and Jenny is a nurse. And they live on a deer farm. They've run the deer farm alongside their professions for many, many years. I started by spending some time talking about their life before retirement. The reason I spoke to Stan about that was because, like lots and lots of us, things haven't always gone smooth for them. But that got patched up, and he talks a little bit about that. When I first got to the farm, I sat down, had a cup of tea with Stan, and Jenny was out doing something. As we progressed, Jenny started clattering about the kitchen, and you can hear that in the background, but that's what happens when you're doing live interviews. I wasn't going to interview Jenny at first, but she sort of got a bit involved, and as I got towards the end of the interview with Stan, he said, "Talk to Jenny." And I'm really, really glad I did, because she told me about the same instances, the same things as Stan did, but from a different point of view. In some cases, a very different point of view. And it's worth comparing what the two of them said. Stan, as I said, he runs a deer farm, and he was a hunter, and I think that's probably what led him into being interested in farming deer. Now, what's interesting is that first Jenny, but then later Stan, used their skills, their existing professional skills, to help other people. You'll hear that what they did was, Jenny first went overseas as a volunteer abroad. They went to Mongolia, and she was able to use her nursing skills in an orphanage there, and Stan followed along. Best they tell the story rather than me. I started out greeting Stan, asking him how he was, and then indicating that it had taken me just about 3 hours from my house to get to where he was up country, and asking him where the hell he lived.
Well, you're a couple of 100 k's from Melbourne on the Maroondah Highway, which leads to Mansfield and Mount Buller and the ski fields. And it's a place we came to because of a number of reasons. My wife and I parted company. We eventually decided to get back together. And the kids didn't want to go.
Has that been a good move?
Yeah, well, we've been back together for 25 years or something, so
yeah,
it's not too bad.
Not a bad move.
I'm not sure it was 100%, but yeah, it's not too bad.
Well, I wanted to talk to Stan today, listeners, because he's got a profession, he's a farmer, and he's helped a lot of people. It's the last one I wanted to talk about really in depth, but let's have a listen to how Stan finished up here on the farm.
Well, we had a small farm at Taggart. When we got back together, we decided on Merton because of its location, and we bought this place quite cheaply.
Was it a deer farm when you got here?
No, it was owned by a local, or son of a local. He and his brother inherited quite a lot of land in the area, and drank it away. Gradually, the farm was chopped up until it was all sold.
All right. Well, so you're here on the farm. Initially, it wasn't your main focus. What were you doing? What was your profession?
I'm an electrical contractor by trade. It took me quite a while to get into the job here. I went over near Mildura way, driving a huge wheel digger in the desert for pipelines for something to do and make a bit of money. And then we just gradually, we had the deer, and the deer when we came here, the deer were worth nothing. The price was terrible. And my bank manager said, well, you still owe us the money. But he had serviced a lot of deer farmers. And his comment was, have you got a place where you can put a paddock where you don't have to look at them? I went, yeah. He said, well, put a fence up and put them there. So we did. Arguably, it's probably the best move we made because we put them there, they just gradually grew in numbers.
Well, then let's move on from there. What's your main focus now? What do you really enjoy now?
I still like the deer farm. I enjoy that. And I think that helps me keep young. People often say, oh, you don't look nearly 70. Well,
as far as the farm's concerned, what's the best thing about being on the farm?
I've
got to tell you folks that Jen is sniggering in the background here.
I think it's the fact that I don't have neighbours. I like to look out over the place and the neighbours' places. Even when I'm not working with deer, I still love that room to move.
People who are not farmers don't recognise, and I found this, is that it's a really creative enterprise. You've got to be thinking all the time and working out how to do stuff. And
even my accountant said that to me yesterday when we were chatting. She said, well, what would you do? I said, I don't know. And she said, well, that'll shorten your life. She said, and my accountant, by the way, is probably 75, 76. She said, what else would I do? I enjoy doing it and it keeps me active.
That's the perfect segue into what I want to talk to you about. So let's talk about the things that you've been doing for other people. You volunteered to work overseas.
Well, my wife decided in her wisdom after the children were gone that she'd put in for a job as a volunteer for Australian Volunteers. And she got a placement in Mongolia. Yours truly wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go. And after living here for about 6 months, 5.5 months by myself, I was starting to get a bit lonely. And Australian Volunteers had constantly said to me that if I wanted to go and stay with Jen in Mongolia, they would send me. And eventually, after about 5.5 months, I weakened and said, I'll go. And Jen had already been there for 6 months or so. I went over just as a spouse. I didn't have a job. But the orphanage where Jen worked put me to work from day one. So I drove the bus for them and did a lot of the maintenance and all that sort of stuff.
And what was Jen doing?
Jen was working as basically the health officer at the orphanage, and her job was to try to maintain the health of the children. Yeah, she's a nurse. And as I said, they just gave me all the manual jobs around the place, and I took them on.
Did you enjoy it? Enjoy doing that?
Yeah, I loved it. And I didn't want to go to Mongolia, but they dragged me kicking and screaming out of the place because I didn't want to go.
You didn't want to leave?
I didn't want to leave.
Okay.
And I went back, I self-funded and went back a year later for a while.
What was it about the place that you loved?
The people, the countryside. It's like living in the Wild West. The larger majority of Mongolians still are nomads, and they travel all over the country. They move 4 times a year to suit the seasons for their animals. There's no fences in Mongolia at all. They travel around all year. The scenery is great. Their summers are to die for. Their winters are not quite so good. The day we left to come home from Mongolia, it was minus 35 the day we left.
I can tell you love it. Yeah, the way you're talking about it, you love it.
Yeah, I did, and it was a great experience. One that I thought I'd never have because I just didn't want to go.
Is it something that folks brought up in Australia, or Westerners anyhow, anybody could do that, or have you got to be a special sort of person?
I think anyone could do it, providing they're willing to melt into the country of their choice that they go to. My interpreter once said to me, Stanley, if you want to fit into Mongolia, you act like a Mongol and they'll treat you like a Mongol. And I did, and it was the best thing I ever did. Australian Volunteers managers couldn't understand how, in that short space of time, I'd been out wolf hunting with the Prime Minister, I'd been fishing here, doing this, doing that. And it's because I took notice of what Arjun said and become a Mongol. Drove like a Mongol, acted like a Mongol, drank like a Mongol, and for that I fitted in.
They're pretty good drinkers, I think, aren't they?
They drink a lot of vodka. They do have another alcoholic drink there, it's called Erag, and it's fermented horse milk. Not everyone likes it. My wife certainly didn't. I developed a bit of a taste for it. It's about equal to a bit stronger than our light beer, and they drink a lot of it. It's you look in the barrel and think, oh, do I want to drink that? But it's okay. And once again, it's one of those things that I found when you go to a place like that, if you blend into their society, they want to feed you and they want to give you something to drink. Like that, you'll get to a camp and they'll offer you a cup of tea, but the cup of tea is salty. They put salt in it. That takes a bit of getting used to that, the salt. But you get used to it. But the other thing is, if you happily accept what their way of life, they treat you totally different than if you don't. And the one thing that we noticed when we were there, it was the year of the volunteers, and there was a lot of Australian volunteers in Mongolia at the time, and a lot of them couldn't hack it and they went home.
So how does the organisation, how does Australian volunteers cope with that if somebody...
I think they're disappointed, but it's part of the deal.
Let's just move on to Australian volunteers for a second. You went to Mongolia and you followed Jen over there. Where else could people go? What sort of countries do they send people to?
They've got places, the Solomons, Fiji, Indonesia, Vietnam.
So all around, many third world countries.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. We came home and everything ticked along for a while, and then I used to check their website every now and then. All of a sudden there was a lot of tradies jobs come on the website. And one was teaching, and one was a teacher in the Solomons. I've taught apprentices, but I had no experience as a teacher. And I spoke to a guy who had taken a job over there as a carpenter teacher. So I put in for the job and I got it straight away. And then that was okay, and I was all set to go to the Solomons. And then they rang me up a little while later and said, "Look, we've got a problem. There's a job in Jakarta at a hospital. They need an electrical person to teach about the running and maintenance of the hospital electricals." So I said, "Oh, all right, okay, if that's what you want me to go." And then they rang me up about 3 weeks. They said, "Oh, we've got a problem." I said, "What the bloody hell's the problem this time?" I said, "Oh, you know how you said you didn't want to do maintenance of heart monitors and all that sort of stuff because it was too technical?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we actually have a bloke who's applied for a job in East Timor who's a technician. What do you think?" I said, "Well, if I was half smart, Ian, sitting in your seat, I'd send him to Indonesia and I'd send Stan Brown to East Timor." So they then sent this guy to Indonesia. It didn't work out, but yours truly went to East Timor. I was managing a workshop that did mechanical electrical work, and I was actually working at this place on behalf of Australian volunteers, but for a doctor from Sydney who sponsored the place. Unusually, the job required me to be not only the manager, the financial manager and the teacher and the man who runs the joint, which Australian volunteers are not very keen on you handling any money, but it was the only way in which we could do the job. So I did, and even now, it was only a couple of months ago, the workshop rang me up to say hi and how are you, and the business.
So they've maintained contact. That's fabulous.
Oh yeah, that's good. They ring every now and then. And
so the people who go and volunteer abroad, do you need to have a profession or a trade, or can regular folks, just with regular jobs go?
They usually suggest different trades or skills or professions. Jen would never have much trouble in getting a placement even now, because quite often the health area is a lot of advertising.
You mentioned their website. No, I had a look at their website before I came. Yeah. When you look at the website, there's a whole list there of places to go and what they need. So anyone who's interested could really just have a look and see if they fit the bill. Well,
the job in East Timor, I got it because of the electrical side of it. Australian volunteers didn't realise that I would have to be the CEO of the workshop. That's the way it worked out. But I'd run my own business for 35 years or more, so it wasn't a major step. I took over from another Australian who worked there for money, and he'd made a bit of a mess of it. We came to a serious altercation with him at one stage, but I floated along with the boys at the workshop, and all I did was I guided them how to manage the money, how to make profit. Like, they didn't even know what the word profit meant until I explained it to the young trainee manager. and now they're kicking goals.
It's going good. Fantastic.
Australian Volunteers were never happy with the position that I had in regards to the fact that I was in total control of everything from the money down. But it's the only way it would work.
It's worked out now.
And I was offered actually another job whilst I was there from Australian Volunteers in Gambia in Africa, 2 jobs, to go over there and set up 2 workshops. It's 6 months, and I could stay if I wanted to or go home.
Can I ask you, the 2 places you've been now, what's the best thing? For you personally, what's been the best thing coming out of that?
I think outside the fact that if you feel as though you've been successful, living in a different culture is quite a different experience, and I think if you learn to live in their culture and be like them, it's a bit of a game changer, and you come away with some benefits in that area because you're a different person. Yeah, basically.
That's great. Can I move on then to Australian Volunteers? And I know there are other organisations that do a similar thing. Let's just talk about the organisation of this for a second. How young or old do you have to be to go?
Well, I've seen volunteers in their 20s.
And if we're talking about retired folks, so say you're 55, 60, you're still wanted?
Well, when I went to a briefing at Australian Volunteers, there was a guy there who was older than me, so he probably was, at that stage, was 66 or 7. He was what they called a repeat offender. He'd put in for numerous jobs, usually in New Guinea, and he had basically not much in the way of skills, except he was pretty handy with his hands. Very creative at establishing bores, made pumps out of things like Nescafe can lids and all sorts of stuff like that. And he was a fairly old gentleman and
not old by our standards now.
Well, not old by my standards, I suppose, but an older man. And he'd done that, I think that was his 6th.
So it's not only a possibility, it's a reality for folks who are looking forward to retirement, or perhaps they've just retired and they can go and help some people overseas and really make a contribution to the world.
Yeah, I think you're just passing on your skills. And I think some people think they're going to go over there and change the world, and that's the wrong attitude. It is the wrong attitude. You go there to empower them with some skills that will help them. You don't go there to try to change them. That won't work.
If we talk about the logistics of this, things like how do you get there, do you get paid, can your wife and children go, etc., etc. So when you volunteer, do you get paid to go?
You get similar money to what the locals get. When we went to Mongolia, Jen got paid $50 a month from the orphanage. I got paid $50 Australian from Australian Volunteers. When we went to Timor, it was a totally different ballgame. They never would tell us why, but we were paid significantly more money in East Timor than what we did in Mongolia. A lot of it, I think, had to do with the American dollar, and we were paid a reasonable amount of money. Not great amounts, but reasonable. They pay for your accommodation.
What about your fare to get there?
They pay for your living expenses. They don't just drop you off in the country with a handful of dollars and go for it. They pay your airfare, your insurance.
By Western standards, once you get there, it's really subsistence living almost.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is.
And you've got to be the sort of personality who can cope with that. Yeah.
Well, Jen and I comfortably lived in East Timor, in Mongolia, I should say. A lot of the younger ones struggled. Financially, they found it not enough money to live, but that's because they didn't cook for themselves. They wanted to go out all the time and eat, all their meals out and all that sort of stuff.
So it relies on your expectations. Yeah.
When we were there, the American dollar rose heavily against the Australian dollar, and the volunteers were really complaining, a lot of the younger ones, and I started to realise there was a problem. I contacted Australian Volunteers and said, hey, you've got to look at the dollar, we're in trouble there. Credit to them, they changed it and gave us a bit more money to compensate for the dollar. We lived quite handsomely because Jen had a nice apartment when I got there by Mongol standards. It was fully furnished, had TV, all that sort of stuff. You had water when the water ran, sometimes it didn't. But
So what about negatives? Was there any negatives or any disasters while you were there?
I did feel so. The negatives? No.
Okay.
I'd just taken up fly fishing the year before. I landed in a country that had heaps of rivers with lots of trout, had lots of deer to hunt, had wolves to hunt, vodka to drink, the whole thing. I was in heaven.
You make it sound like heaven, yes.
It was. Yeah. I fell into that area very quickly. The downside of it, I guess, is, which will always stick with you, be it Mongolia or Timor, is a lot of the poverty that they live in. It's hard to explain to people just how bad it is. You show them photos and they look at it, oh, yeah. But to actually live in it is a totally different ballgame. And some people can't do that. They just can't survive in that situation. And we lived in the edge of UB, which is Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, and the orphanage was in the middle of a slum suburb on the other side of the river on the way to the airport. And when I say slum, I tell you it's slum. I was just blown away when I first got there. I just wanted to go home. I thought, this is just, I don't know whether I could handle this. And some people can't handle it straight away. And I did, but I had a wife there, so I stayed there, and after a few weeks of going to the orphanage, and then I busied myself because the water system hadn't worked for 2 or 3 years. So although I'm not a plumber, I'm a farmer, so you have to know all about everything. So I rebuilt all their water system and made it work, and I built rooms on the orphanage, drove the bus to the hospitals and doctors for the kids and all that sort of stuff.
So the takeaway in some respects is that you get a really genuine, heartfelt idea of how other people are living, and you can appreciate then how we are here in Australia.
Oh, yeah. And we used to go to the place called the Step Inn, which was at the British Embassy on Friday night. It was a boozer, that's all it was. We went up there and drank beer. And I had a fair share of heated conversations with people that were there, Europeans that were there that weren't living in that situation, and felt it was degrading and very poor, and they wouldn't fit in at all. It was all about the dollars for them. The more I got into the orphanage and living there, the worse I got at that.
Because you're identifying with the locals.
Yeah, and I had no hesitation of hitting out. We actually had a group of guys there who were paid workers. I can't remember what they were. There was about 5 of them, and I had some heated conversations with them. And in the end, I said, "Well, come out the orphanage. If you think you know that much, you come out the orphanage, and I'll show you what it really is like." And there was a guy there who had been to the orphanage. He came out one day, and he said to these guys, "Just give him the money. Don't bother going." So they donated money to the orphanage on his say-so that they would not be able to handle what they were going to see. You know, we had visits from probably more Americans than anyone else, and they come to the orphanage in reasonable numbers, and they were always very generous and donated. They donated money or gifts, or some of them actually went back to America and with a donation system that they donated continuously every month, a few dollars here, a few dollars there.
Yeah. If people are considering this, they think, oh, well, that's something I can do, that's a worthwhile thing to do in life after I'm retired. Would you recommend it to them?
Oh, for sure. I believe nearly every Australian kid should be sent there at the age of 18, just to remind them what the rest of the world might be like. I'd recommend it to anyone. They need, in their briefings, they need to be taught of what to expect and how their life will change, because it does change your life a lot. But it's an experience I'd recommend to anyone.
If people wanted to find out more about it, how do they do that?
Australian Volunteers is a good example to talk to them, other organisations that are around the world, VSOs and a few of those people. The thing they have to understand is that you will not be living like a European. You will not. It simply doesn't happen. If you do, you might as well stay home.
Are there any books or websites? Well, there's the Australian Volunteers website, but is there any way of contacting people who have been, such as yourself, so they can get first-hand information? Australian
Volunteers do have talks on it from volunteers who have been overseas. They give talks on that. They have On their website, quite often they'll have return volunteers giving a talk on be it Solomons or Africa or wherever. Mm-hmm. The only thing I found or find these days, the volunteers, because they're paid by AusAid, pay them, it also is a bit political. Like, we hardly send any volunteers to South America. We don't send them into certain countries.
Okay. Because
it's not in our interests.
That's something I hadn't even entered my mind. That it's
So you'll find that the countries they send people into, East Timor, the Solomons, Fiji, any of that sort of Pacific countries, parts of Africa, it's a political thing. And AusAid, who sponsor Australian volunteers, stipulate this is where the areas where you send them. When we were in Mongolia had only been a separate country from Russia for a number of years. There's a story I tell, it's about the Prime Minister I went out wolf hunting with, and hell of a nice guy. He was deposed because he was too honest. He was sacked because he was too honest. His own party sacked him. Yeah, it's different, and the one thing you need to do is not get involved in political or religious situations. The orphanage was run by an Australian woman, an Ananda Marga nun. Yeah, it's a long and involved story, but she found God in India and went to Mongolia and started taking a few girls off the street, and suddenly wound up meeting this Mongolian guy who helped us set up the orphanage. And
for folks who are thinking about this, or from what we've been talking about here, what would you say, what's the takeaway message from you as far as working overseas?
I would probably say to them it's a great experience if you want to immerse yourself in another culture. And you have to. To be successful, you need, it's like Arjun used to say to me, Stanley, you drive like Mongol, you think like Mongol, you will be Mongol. And you have to be prepared to go into that zone. If you feel that you can't, if your standards would hold you back, then I seriously doubt that you'd make a good volunteer.
Here you are, you're back on the farm, your concentration is on the farm, and so looking forward for the next few years, what are you looking forward to?
A bit more of what I've got now, I guess.
Okay.
If the right job come up with Australian volunteers,
you'd do it again?
I'd do it again. I'd consider doing it again. You can do another volunteer over there.
Listeners, I've got Jen, Stan's wife, with me to give her view of what was going on overseas, and whether she enjoyed it, whether she got anything out of it. Jen, tell us about your experiences over there.
Well, I originally went to Outer Mongolia because I'd always wanted to go as a volunteer when the children were little. A friend of mine, a work colleague, had gone to the Kiribati Islands with her family for 2 years and lived over there, and Stan was adamant he was never going to go. And then the boys went to Melbourne, went to uni, went overseas, and there was this job that came up in Outer Mongolia, and it was 2 years after I'd had a really major accident and was in hospital for 6 months. And
that was a horse riding accident, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Stan thought that I'd forgotten all about going overseas and going volunteering, and this girl at work said, she saw this job advertised, and I said, I'm going to apply for it. And when I told him, he was not a happy camper, but anyway. So I went and had a job interview, and I went, and it was 35 plus when I left Melbourne and minus 35 when I arrived in Ulaanbaatar.
Your profession is a nurse.
I'm a general trained nurse, a midwife, and a maternal and child health nurse.
So was that the requirement for the job that you were looking at?
Yeah, pretty much. I had to have nursing qualifications to go training the workers at the orphanage and looking after the health of the children, and that was a bit of an experience because you would never go to a Mongolian hospital if you were sick. It was like stepping back into the 1930s. So I found this really great clinic run by the South Korean doctors called the Yonsei Clinic, and they volunteer their time, and so I took all the children to see a Dr. Khan at the Yonsei Clinic, and at least that was good. But you wouldn't take the children back to the orphanage with intravenous strips or medication because the workers just they'd give it to them sometimes and not give it to them other times, and didn't see the need for that. So our flat in Ulaanbaatar was often chock-a-block babies and toddlers.
Oh, okay.
so that was good.
Are there any stories you can tell me of things that happened at the
orphanage?
Yes?
Yeah, I was like doing a training exercise on how to do stuff with the workers, and they would sit there and half listen and half not listen, and the interpreter, Chuggy Chongsogmaya, her name was, but we called her Chuggy, she, I would say something quite short and simple with 4 or 5 words, and it would be a whole sentence, and I said, "What did you say to them?" She goes, "Oh no, I just tell them that." I said, "Oh, okay." And then it didn't ever seem to get through, so that was pretty frustrating, but it was pretty funny because I was teaching them how to percuss someone's chest to get the mucus out, to bang the chest, and I came in one day and all the little toddlers were sitting down with whatever dolls they had, with the dolls over their knee banging their backs, and I just laughed at that. I thought that's pretty funny.
Something sunk in. That was good.
Yeah, so that was good. And another time we took a baby to the clinic and it had to have an intravenous, and it was minus 20, and we got out of the clinic, and as soon as we left the heat of the Yonsai clinic, we walked out, and the fluid froze in the IV line. So I was walking across the street. Stan was hailing a taxi because he didn't have the van for some unknown reason. I have no idea why. And I was sucking on the IV tube to melt the fluid so that it just could get into the baby. So that was pretty
and
funny.
What were your general impressions?
They were very, very poor. They had no running water. They employed a guy overnight to stoke the fire to keep the wall heaters going, and sometimes he'd go to sleep and you'd go in the morning and all the kids were freezing and the ice would come through the concrete walls, and so it was pretty tragic, and they'd all come to you when you were eating your meal because you would eat the same as them, and you'd have a spoonful for you and a spoonful for a toddler because they'd all stand around you like little birds with their mouths open, and that was fraught with a few problems because then I had hepatitis A, which was, I kept looking at myself in the mirror thinking, and I was a bit tired, and I thought, a bit yellow. And then one day Stan said to me, "You're more than yellow, Jen, you're a bit orange." So anyway, went to the...
nice caring husband.
Yeah, so I went to the clinic that Australian Volunteers International recommend you to go. It's a UN doctor. And she said, "Oh, you've got hepatitis A." Because before I went to the toilet and my urine was like Coca-Cola, and I thought, "Oh, I've got hepatitis A." So you don't die from hepatitis A. You get pretty sick, and because we were paid, we could eat reasonable food. So if the Mongols got it out on the steppe and they got it really badly, and if it was associated with vomiting and diarrhoea, they'd probably die because We went on a trip up horse riding after that happened for 7 days, and it was awful. I mean, the horse ride was great, but we got to Renchalom, and we had to get back to Murin, which was the airport, and we went in a truck, and it took us 17 hours to do 112 kilometres.
Oh, could have walked there.
It was the worst experience of my life. It was horrible.
You're putting people off.
Yeah, but that was fine. I mean,
but if you go there from what you're saying, from what Stan was saying, if you go there expecting an adventure and expecting, then
the people are generous. Like that night that we came and we had to stop, the truck driver just pulled in at a gear camp, and it was like 2:00 in the morning, and they all got out of bed and they made us tea, and then the old boy got out of his bed and made me sleep in his bed.
Goodness me.
So, they're really friendly, and sometimes it's quite frustrating because, I used to say to Arjun sometimes when they wouldn't listen to me, he said, "Oh, but Jenny, Mongolian people, very proud people." And I said, "Well, Arjun," I said, "there's a very fine line between stubborn and pride." And he laughed. But, people are stubborn or proud of what they do, and they have to live that way because of the circumstances that they're in.
Yes.
So I think if you try and go over there and change everything about them, you might as well not even go. You immerse yourself in their culture and, you work with what they live with, and then you see very good reasons for what they do. And it was the same in Timor. There's many good reasons why they don't take their babies down to Dili from Same, because, Same is on the southern side of Timor, and it's only 132 kilometres, but it takes 5 hours to drive there because the roads are so bad. There's no social welfare system in Timor. If you took a baby to Dili, it would possibly die anyway. Then the Timorese would have to find somewhere to live and pay for it themselves. They would have to transport the dead baby back to Same, usually in the back of a truck because they can't afford anything else or an overcrowded bus. Then they have to pay for the funeral. So, it worried me a lot when a lot of little babies were born and they were critical, and in Australia you would save them, but I had to listen to Mana Justa and a lot of the other girls, and they said, Mana Jenny, God, maybe this one just go to God this time.
Yes.
And that bothered me.
That's hard, isn't it? It's hard by our culture.
Yeah, there was one baby that clearly wasn't going to go to God. He was just really jaundiced, and they didn't quite get the concept of putting them under phototherapy, which is what you would do in Australia, which is pretty simple, non-invasive, and then the baby wouldn't feed because it was sleepy, and then of course they labelled the mother a bad mother because she wouldn't feed the baby, and the baby was a bad baby because it wouldn't feed. And in the end I actually spat the dummy a bit, and I went down to the UNPOL police, the UN police, and I said to the Jordanian guy that was the commander, I said, can you get a UN chopper to take this baby out? He goes, oh, we don't usually do that. And I said, well, you come into the clinic and you have a look at this baby. And I said, and you'll know why I want a chopper. Anyway, he came and he went, okay. And by the time we left and we got back, it was 3:30. And then he said to me, I've rung the UN helicopter. He said, but they can't come because they don't fly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I spat it and I said, well, don't, and I swore at him. I said the F word. I said, well, don't effing worry. I said, because it'll be dead in the morning. I said, thanks for your help, and I walked out. I was furious. So anyway, I was walking up the road, walking home, sweating about what I was going to do. So I rang up this Scottish doctor at the Australian and New Zealand Army barracks in Dili because I knew them. And he said to me, oh, give me a condition of the baby. And I said, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, doesn't sound good, does it? And I said, no. And he said, we'll have a Black Hawk there in 20 minutes. ETA, blah, blah, blah. And I said, good, thank you very much. So that was amazing. I tell you, I said to Stan, that's how I want to fly all the time. 20 minutes it took.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So that was and that baby lived, came home, everyone was happy, but you wouldn't do that unless the child was critical. But all the others, you have to sort of go, But sometimes I'd come home from work and I'd say to Stan and say, how was your day? And I'd go, either great or I just want to bash my head through this concrete wall.
Yeah. Once again, it's your expectations and the standards we have here are so different.
Yeah. Because even the hospital had no running water, no electricity. You wanted to find running water, you had to walk out the road 200 metres up the road to a tap to get it. So
with all that, all those experiences, and you were listening to what Stan had to say, would you go back?
Oh, yeah. I didn't like the mosquitoes. That was the worst. So I covered my body with DEET, which, God knows, probably 10 years down the track I'll end up with some terrible disease, but I didn't get malaria, so that was fine. Yeah. No, it was great.
Terrific.
Kids are great. People are great.
What a fabulous story. Did that touch your heart? It certainly did for me. You can see why I consider them to be extraordinary people. If you think that Stan's interview ended a little bit abruptly, it did, because I started to sign off the conversation and he went into a whole second conversation about somewhere else he'd been. That was just too much, but he had a brilliant second posting to a different country, and loved that as well, was able to add value to the people there and to the community he was in. And it was a whole new story there. But it was just too much to put on this interview because it would have gone on for another hour. You can see that the support that they were able to give the Mongolian community worked both ways, didn't it? They came back different people. They came back with a better appreciation of a different culture, how the people over there lived, and the difference between their lives and our lives. It's a great example also of how you can change your ideas as you go along. Stan really didn't want to go, but then he felt lonely, he said, and he was being prompted to go by the volunteer organisation, and he went, and when he was there he loved it. So you don't need to be locked into your preconceptions of things, and he was certainly locked in to start off with, and he found he was wrong. You need to be open to new experiences. My attitude to all these things is, well, what can happen? You're having an adventure. It's interesting the difference between how Stan and Jen told their stories. Stan talked about the mechanics of getting over there and what happened and so on and so on, whereas Jen told stories about the people. She told stories which were happy, stories which were sad, fulfilling, and they were filled with empathy for the people over there. I think she was brilliant. I'm very, very pleased that I got to talk to her as well. If this is of any interest to you, what you should do is get onto your internet and Google Australian volunteers. You'll find 2 or 3 organisations there, and if you have a look at their websites, they give all the details of the places they go, the sort of tasks that are available for Australians to do, how long they are, and so on and so on. So do that. Google Australian volunteers. It's been a great conversation. Please leave comments on the website of your attitude to going overseas, your attitude to different cultures. If you want to contact me directly, as always, henry@retiredexcited.com, and of course the website is retiredexcited.com. So thanks very much for listening to this. It's been a longer session than normal, but well worthwhile, I think. So thank you all. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
I like that.
I'm going to give that a go for sure.
Ian, that was terrific.
That was interesting. What a good idea.